John, thank you for joining us today at Rokt Connects, our series around navigating uncertainty. For those joining us today, I'd like to introduce John Gerzema. He is the CEO of the Harris Poll. Welcome.
Hey, Pete, how are you?
Fantastic. So, John, just to kick things off today, the Harris Poll data suggests and shows that shifting consumers' priorities in 2025. Given this, what do you believe marketers' most important trends are that they cannot afford to ignore right now?
Pete, I think the first most important thing is the trend around what we call crispy consumerism, right? Consumers have propped up the global economy for the past 5 years throughout this period of economic volatility and inflation, and yet at the same time, they're under siege. So I think it's really important to understand from brands and marketers the mindset of today's consumer. They're more value-oriented. They're also, interestingly, more frustrated a little bit as they look at their pocketbooks and their relationship with business. Give you an example. We have in our data 43% of Americans right now feel stuck. Another 24% feel like they're falling behind economically. And when we ask them, who do you blame for your situation? Well, 30% they blame themselves, 30% they blame the government, but 39% they blame brands. They blame brands and companies, and that is because of inflation, both inflation and employment. So this is something that I think marketers and businesses need to understand, is that there's a volatility that's emerging in the consumer brand relationship.
Interesting. And obviously, given that every dollar that you mentioned there around inflation, increasing costs and employment, therefore every marketing dollar now is being scrutinized. How do you see leading brands using data to find the right target audiences and ensure they're tapping into that sentiment across the board there for consumers?
Yeah, you just have to remember it's not just about the price of milk and eggs. Consumers are stressed in so many different ways. We found in our data that $10,000 is the average amount that American consumers are holding on to right now in terms of revolving credit card debt. So you have to understand that. Another interesting fact, 60% of millennials and Gen Z are still on an allowance from their parents. So there's a lot of frustration that exists in consumerism. So really what brands have got to do is they've got to make the moment, right? I think increasingly with these scarce marketing dollars that are being allocated, you've got to be hyper relevant, right? You've got to be focused on identifying your intent consumers to get to deeper sort of relationships. But that opportunistic moment to really tap in is, I think, the thing that's really focused right now. Making the moment is about being increasingly relevant, highly personalized, highly customized, so that you make sure that your offer is really going to land and it isn't just another thing that they're being besieged with.
Yeah, we're seeing that from some of our marketing partners in there, that not only do they have to prove the marketing's work, but looking for partners who can provide that relevancy to them, and not going to more partners, but to actually fewer partners and doing more with them. So with so much noise about AI and automation out there in market, and perhaps I would be replaced by AI in interviewing based on how this is going today, which is back to the marketers. But what's actually moving the needles as it pertains to AI and automation? What's moving the needle for brands facing these tighter budgets that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously AI in our culture is something that's both filled with lots of promise and peril. In our data, 75% of Americans believe that AI is going to disrupt their career, to your point, Pete, in some context. But there's also a lot of excitement around it. I think when it comes to brands, you can't really think about it as a blanket tool, right? You've got to be thinking more about how do you use AI with strategic applications? How do you use it to really, for example, maximize the spending at certain touch points? How can you sort of understand in ways that you can create more intelligent offers, Pete, as you were talking about, sort of more personally relevant offers? And that's where I think AI can really come in and deliver.
Right. If you think about the shopping experience, we were very focused on that transaction moment. We understand that relevancy is key there. When we ran a survey with the Harris Poll, I think it was back in the fall, we saw that 70% of consumers enjoyed shopping experiences. I think we all do if we're buying the right thing and we're buying a gift either for ourselves or others. That said, we saw the numbers rise to 80% for millennials and nearly 80% for Gen Z. Is that still true today, given the uncertainty and change we've seen since the fall?
Yeah, online shopping remains sort of a constant and even welcome relief for people. I think we coined it together, Rokt and Harris poll. We called it JOCO, right? Sort of this absolute sort of joy of checking out. You can call it a dopamine hit if you want, but it really gets to this place where the bar for experience just has to continue to grow. And so as you're moving your way down the funnel, what are we doing to really drive those personalized, seamless, and really rewarding offers that are really connecting with people?
As we get towards rounding out this conversation, a couple of final questions, which is there one or two things that you think most marketers are getting wrong today when we think about the consumer behavior within the shopping environment and that shopping experience?
I think there's a real big disconnect on value right now between consumers and brands. We saw in our Rokt and our Harris poll data that 55% of consumers today actually plan to buy products with the lowest prices when they're shopping in the next few months because a lot of those economic things we just talked about. But really interesting, Pete, only 5% of retailers think that shoppers are going to trade down. So, you've got value-seeking shoppers looking for maximum experience, maximum quality for their dollars. We saw in our data, our reputation data, 71% of companies' reputations declined last year because they were passing along costs. They weren't driving a great product and service quality for the dollars. We got to understand that's back to that crispy consumerism. Your consumers looking for value and they're looking for great quality.
Thank you. I'm going to throw in a bonus question. When we think of the consumer looking for value within a category, do you have insights into consumers actually getting out of a category completely? And if I think they're around casual dining to QSR, right? The consumers today just can't afford to go casual dining as frequently as they are, and so they're trading down into QSR. And so we're seeing cross-category consumer shifts. Do you have data and insights to back that up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of that happening across sectors that's tariff influenced. Fascinating fact about tariffs, 40% of Americans believe that the importing country is paying the tariffs. So there's a lot of potential sticker shock that's going to come through the funnel if these tariffs are to continue. And, even as of today, it looks like things are being sort of slowed down a little bit. But the point remains that consumers are very much stressed on their budgets for all the things we've been talking about. And so there's a trend now toward sort of opting out of different categories. We saw in our data, 40% of Americans are interested in opting out of the economy. And what that means is just spending less in certain places where they would have spent. So it's all highly personalized. Like we're talking about, Pete, it might be about, as you say, trading out of, mid-scale dining into QSR, or it might be moving out of different categories. So that's the issue right now is how are you as a marketer thinking about protecting your category and actually using this as an opportunity to provide better value?
Yeah, thank you. I would say, I'm not sure if there's a correlation there with the 30% of people that blame themselves for their financial situation and those 40% that say it's the other country paying. I think those two are the different ends of the spectrum.
Indeed.
From that standpoint. Well, one final question we have, John, is what is one idea that you think every marketer, given the uncertainty that we're seeing, needs to hear right now?
Pete, this is old-fashioned consumer champion. The brands that Americans really adore are the ones that think they have their back. And the very fact that only 12% of corporate reputations rose last year, for me, is a massive opportunity. How do you go back to the basics about being consumer-centric? Cliches are cliches because they're true and timeless. And really, I think we've forgotten a little bit about that. Through COVID, we see Americans saying that companies are passing along their costs. They're actually not doing anything to be in my corner. So the extent to which you can really go back to your roots of being a surprising, delighting, offering value, but being consumer-centric is really the timeless opportunity right now. And there's big evergreen growth for the companies that can really focus on doing that.
So if you think about marketers, there's sometimes promotional budgets and marketing budgets, media budgets, part of that. Are you essentially saying that there is a way in which to join how you're going to market with your media with promotional budgets to show you're putting cost savings back into the consumer's wallet? Or is it more than just that?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it, is how are you being transparent with your pricing? How are you potentially showing your pricing and your cost through the system? Consumers are just highly suspect right now, and that's at the point of this lack of esteem toward business, which, by the way, Pete, we have not seen in our data. Business has always been seen as more trustworthy than politicians or the government. So this is, again, 5 years of global consumers facing stacked crises around the world and really amplified by the last 3 years over inflation. So, inflation may have abated somewhat depending on the experts, but 80% of Americans in our data say that I don't trust experts. The metrics that matter are the metrics that are in my pocketbook and at the kitchen table.
Great. Well, thank you, John. I really appreciate spending time with you today. I always learn from you when we're here. And thank you for joining Rokt Connects. And I hope that for everyone listening, you have a somewhat clearer path of navigating the uncertainty in front of us.
Thanks, Pete.